if you're thinking about the future of Southern California and grand bargains that can make a difference, listen up. So I don't really know everybody here yet, but it's, I'm eager to hear what you have to say. Eli, we want to have one of the slides about our ports. Oh, I have Alison Linder has. Which one's Alison? That must be Alison down there, because I know these two. Hi, Alison. We have some slides here for you, don't we?
Yeah, I sent them to Eli last night.
All right, now this, Alison works at SCAG, and SCAG is the regional planning body that envisions the future of goods movement, but doesn't have the authority or the money to actually implement it. And that's one of our problems, I think, is figuring out how to implement things and have money for things that are regional in nature when most of our transportation is county by county. So would all of you agree that that's one of the challenges? How do you get counties together in some sort of decision-making framework that's rational? So Alison, Eli, where are we on the slides here? All right, let's see. Is it coming? There's something.
I don't read it.
All right, so Alison, tell us about the goods movement system in Southern California.
Sure.
I think you need to use your microphone, though.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Speak right into it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was asked to give a brief overview, kind of introduction for this panel to talk a little bit about the importance of regional goods movement. So I'll start out by repeating a little bit what Denny said. I'm from SCAG. We're a 6-county metropolitan planning organization. We do regional planning for the 6 counties. And actually, as Danny asked, is it difficult to bring the counties together? Of course it is, but that's kind of SCAG's expertise, being a leader in a very diverse region. And that work comes together in our regional transportation plan, which is a federally certified document, and is produced every 4 years. So in that plan, we outline a comprehensive vision for a regional system. And this is done in close collaboration with all of our partners. So what I was going to start out by saying is something you probably already know, but the region has an extremely extensive goods movement system. We have the 2 largest ports in the country, Port of LA and Long Beach, and a 3rd mid-sized port called Port of Hueneme. A fun fact is that 1 out of every 3 BMWs sold in the country is imported through Port of Hueneme. Another fun fact is the extensive warehousing in the region. So, it's not just transportation, it's a whole infrastructure of logistics and distribution centers. We have 1.2 billion square feet of warehousing in the region, which is about 37 square miles, and that's an area larger than the size of Miami. If you think about how, 37 square miles, 6 by 6 roughly, think about how long it takes you to get 6 miles, and think of that entire 6 miles being full of warehousing. This goods movement infrastructure supports a lot of economic activity. Goods movement dependent industries such as manufacturing, construction, retail, wholesale trade all depend on our transportation infrastructure. And these goods movement dependent industries contribute about 1/3 to our gross regional project and account for 1/3 of jobs.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
The goods movement dependent industries account for 1/3 of our gross regional product and about 1/3 of our regional jobs.
And does that include the goods movement industry itself?
It does. It includes the goods movement industry, which was about 300,000 jobs that were related to transportation and logistics. And then other industries such as retail, manufacturing, wholesale. And in sum, those were about 3 million jobs in 2014.
All right, so we're talking about a system that has a big impact economically, but it also has a big impact environmentally.
Yep, I was just getting to that.
So what?
The impact has, of course, been increasing with increasing economic activity. As you guys know, e-commerce and other kinds of demand are increasing as well, and this generates both international and local goods movement activity. This has impacts on our air quality. Goods movement is responsible for about 50% of all NOx-related emissions and about 18% of PM in the region. And there's also traffic and congestion impacts. A 2013 study done by Tate identified that this congestion translates to about $1.1 billion in truck-related costs. And the same group, Tate, did another study in 2017 that listed the top 100 bottlenecks in the nation. And of those top 100, 5 of those were in the SCAG region.
5 of the top 100 bottlenecks. When
Exactly.
you say bottleneck.
A bottleneck is an area of extremely high congestion.
And so that's a bottleneck for everybody, not just for trucks.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay.
Usually the infrastructure is shared. So.
All right, so we have an industry that has a lot of upside, a third of the jobs, a third of the GDP or whatever.
Yeah, 1/3.
And it's got a lot of downsides, air pollution, congestion.
That's right, and safety as well.
And so does SCAG ever spend time envisioning how to have a lot of the good without the bad?
We definitely do a lot of work to think about infrastructure improvements and strategies to address these issues. Our 2016 Regional Transportation Plan identified about $75 billion worth of goods movement related projects between now and 2040. And those projects include things like a truck lane system, $5 billion to address those bottlenecks that I mentioned, $11 billion in rail improvements, which includes addressing 42 of the region's worst grade separations. And again, as you mentioned, those are impacts for both, actually grade separations primarily impact non-goods movement transportation or non-rail transportation. And we also have in our goods movement plan, in our regional transportation plan, an environmental action plan. And this plan is a high-level sketch that outlines the path of technology development from the early stages of developing the technology to prototyping it, testing it, demonstrating it, and eventually deploying it. And this plan kind of outlines some key milestones of collaborative work with our partners, a lot of who are on the panel, or who maybe spoke at the earlier panel. And that work is something that is extremely important to do in the near future. And I would just, I guess...
Well, we also had Dr. Parker from the Air District talking about how cleaning up diesel trucks was central, dominates the air plan.
I see my slide now, but I've mostly covered everything. I just wanted to leave the panel with, or not leave, but kind of start off with thinking, again, the economic impacts of goods movement are very dramatic, and so are the consequences. And even though it's a third of jobs that are dependent, think about our lifestyles and our activities, and until we're really willing to change that and look at our consumption patterns, these kinds of activities are going to continue. And so it's important to have a strong infrastructure that can handle this traffic in an efficient and environmentally friendly manner.
So in the end, it's kind of on us a little bit there, huh?
I hope so. I think there's much smarter people than me on the panel.
So, I don't know, it's sounds like a lot of good, but there's some bad, right? Adrian, Martinez, you've been especially concerned about how this industry directly affects certain parts of our community, although no doubt you have a concern as well about the larger air quality issues as well, but describe to us your concern about.
Yeah, the goods movement industry poses three concerns, and I think we've touched on a lot of them. One is the toxic localized impacts from the use of diesel fuel in a lot of the equipment. The second is the regional pollutant, so our ozone problems, a large portion of it comes from the freight industry. And then third, we've got greenhouse gases. I think we need to tackle these issues. I must admit, I think a sales tax measure, an incentive, and voluntary programs can play a role, but I am a little discouraged to hear the kind of anti-regulatory discussion. We need some additional regulations, particularly the Air Resources Board is exploring zero emissions regulations. Those are important companions to whatever voluntary and incentive program exists, and I wouldn't want people to come away today thinking, oh, we can solve all of our problems with voluntary incentive-based programs. We do need regulatory signals.
All right, so that's a good point, because what we were hearing earlier was that we lacked the authority. But you say there are areas where we have the authority but aren't using it?
Yeah, I mean, California has a lot of authority, and granted, the Clean Air Act was set up to be a cooperative federalism approach. I don't know how much cooperation we're going to have from this federal government, but California does have authority under the Clean Air Act, and we should use it.
Okay, so what's getting you specifics?
So right now, the California Air Resources Board is pursuing Advanced Clean Transit Rule, which is trying to get cleaner transit buses, particularly likely zero-emission buses on the roads. They're exploring a last-mile delivery rule. These are the types of things that send strong regulatory signals. And I think once these laws or regulations are passed, I think it's a good opportunity for us to expand the zero-emission manufacturing. I think for better or worse, for better in my view, California is the nation's capital of large zero-emission vehicle manufacturing. And companies like BYD, Proterra, and myriad others, if they start getting lots of orders due to these regulations, they're going to need to expand. And I think they're likely to expand in LA County. And that's something we should foster.
So, Chris, Shimoda, California Trucking Association. I do think that California Trucking Association deserves to be acknowledged as among the more responsive trucking associations in the country that I'm aware of. They were very instrumental in helping to create the Carl Moyer program, and did the unheard of thing at the end of the Clinton administration and supporting a much more aggressive national truck rule than the American Trucking Association was willing to support. And so, while no doubt there are other issues that are challenges, you do deserve to get credit for where you've stepped up. So let's talk about stepping up. What do we think? The California Trucking, you heard earlier discussion, I think, and we were talking about the availability of clean technology. Adrian has some interest about some regulatory tools that might join with such efforts. Tell me a little bit about where CTA is now about this vision of a non-diesel future.
Sure, and for the near term, I think, just for the crowd's information, it is important to note that some of these negative impacts, I'll tell you, this is not a new discussion. I've been with CTA for 10 years now, and one of the main things that I've worked on since I've been with the association is the implementation of the nation's toughest truck standards, where essentially going down the road in 2023, you should see nothing but what's known as the EPA 2010 model year standard on the road, which reduces diesel particulate matter by 99.9%, NOx emissions by over 90%. And so, this is a problem that we've all sort of collectively been working on for quite some time now. One of the big things that our association is focusing on is actually enforcement of these existing standards. 30% of the trucks on the road are estimated not to comply. Our folks have stepped up and actually made the investments in this new technology, and so we're trying to make sure that at a minimum, and it is going to be the biggest air quality benefit we can actually deliver to local communities, is making sure everybody is sort of abiding by the existing rules, because these were incredibly stringent standards to get from fairly dirty trucks to what are today very clean technology. And so the rules that Adrian's referring to are really talking about, well, we're going to do cleaner internal combustion. That is, absolutely something that's going to happen. Both the state and federal air quality regulators are doing fuel efficiency rules, and we're talking about new standards for trucks with lower ozone contributing emissions here in the pretty near future. But what we're talking about sort of, on the periphery is, okay, if we're going to go to actual zero emissions, this is going to require things like battery electric technology, range extended hybrids, hydrogen fuel cells. This is something that no one else in the rest of the country is really seriously talking about, but we are involved in some rules that are taking some serious steps to actually look at how do we deploy battery electric trucks, in the near future. And so our members are fuel neutral. They could care less what is actually powering the truck as long as it actually can get the job done. And so we are having these discussions about how do we get major manufacturers to step up and start making this technology in a way that's going to allow the 1/3 of jobs in the economy in a place that's so freight dependent like Southern California to continue to operate. And so we don't have any answers yet, but I can tell you that these things are being very seriously worked on right now.
So I feel like it would be irresponsible of me if I didn't. I think that there are, from what I understand, big progress made on diesel technologies on NOx and PM. One of the concerns that we hear is the pollutants that are not part of what they call the criteria pollutants, air toxins in particular. That's one of the most troubling difficulties, especially for people who live in the immediate vicinity of highways and the parks. Am I right, Adrian?
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a little more about that problem?
About the toxic pollution?
Yeah, the air toxins that are...
Yeah, I think so. That's what makes this issue so complicated. You're dealing with 3 different pollutants. They're different strategies. We talked about fuel efficiency strategies and other things like that, criteria pollutant strategies, and also there's concern about just basic use of diesel. I think even though the equipment is much cleaner than it used to be, I think there's several concerns that I think Chris alluded to. Is one, making sure that trucks are actually operating properly, because a lot of emissions get emitted when trucks aren't operating, and many trucking companies and truck drivers operate properly and their equipment's working, but a lot don't in California. So fixing that problem is important. But I think a goal of getting our equipment off diesel is an important goal. That's something definitely many organizations, I think, would get behind. I think the kind of rub or the tension is going to come in what are you replacing that diesel with. I think there's a current divide on thinking on that issue right now.
Well, we come back to that divide. All of them are alternatives. Diesel is the more severe problem. Am I right?
Yeah, I think we've got to tackle this diesel pollution problem in Southern California.
Okay. And I hear that we got an industry that could be willing, they're fuel neutral essentially, so long as they know that they're going to get comparable performance at a comparable price. And that's a fair statement? Weston, you're with the Harbor Trucking Association. What are your observations about this?
I'm going to sound a lot like Chris here. But yeah, our members, so for those that don't understand the distinction, the California Trucking Association is a statewide organization that represents all types of trucking. Harbor Trucking Association is focused on harbor drayage, so the port truckers, and intermodal trucking. And so we're the folks that are moving the containers on the chassis, not the long haul trucking. And we're the ones that have kind of been the experimental guinea pigs for a lot of the technology. And so we've been fuel neutral, technology neutral. I think that when you look at the first Clean Trucks program, one of the big concerns moving forward is making sure that we don't realize some of the same shortfalls that came out of that. The implementation of some of the natural gas equipment that came into the market wasn't really ready for that type of trucking application. And I think it could be argued that if we had waited a year or two more for something that was really more suited for the industry, we'd probably have more natural gas trucks working in and out of the port. So that's some of the things that we want to look at moving forward. Our members are doing demonstrations and pilot programs with all types of technologies. We have them. One of our members is the guy using the Toyota hydrogen fuel cell truck in demonstrations. We have guys using natural gas trucks. We have folks using electric trucks with BYD. We've met with companies like Tesla to look at what they're trying to come up with. So we are not opposed to the implementation of this, but I think you hit the nail on the head, Denny, when you said it's got to work first and foremost, and there has to be a business case. You can't replace a truck that costs $100,000 or $80,000 with a truck that costs $400,000 or $500,000. It just, there's no economics to it. And the other thing is making sure that the supporting infrastructure is available as well. My member that was doing the trial, or is still doing the trial with BYD, it took him quite some time to work with DWP to be able to get power into his facility to be able to even test the trucks. And so we need to streamline permitting processes to make sure that when folks are trying to do these demonstrations, we're not making it overly costly or burdensome for them to do that. And at the same time, we need to make sure that infrastructure is regional. When you talk about hydrogen, there's one hydrogen fuel station in the entire county of Los Angeles. So we need to do what we can as policymakers to work with industry to make sure that the cream rises to the top when it comes to these technologies, and to make sure that we're not putting the burden on the back of an industry that really has moved the economy here in the region.
All right, but I guess I'm heartened what I'm not hearing from you is no how, no way.
No, I think that, so we take the approach on everything. We try to be a solutions-based organization, and we don't typically all out oppose much of anything. It's how can we make that work, and then what are the trade-offs that need to come into place? And really the trade-offs are how do we make sure that this technology works and that it's not so unaffordable that we completely kill an industry. And I think that's what we're all trying to accomplish, and that's where it's important to continue things like the Prop 1B programs, which will help accelerate, I think, the implementation of a lot of these, the Carl Moyo program. Those are the types of things that we need to look at, but at the same time, the standards need to be put on the engine manufacturers. It would be completely ridiculous if we made it a mandate today that said, starting in 2018, every California needs to drive a 2014 car or newer. There would be complete mutiny, and it makes absolutely no sense. What we do is we work with the engine manufacturers and the car companies to say, if you want to produce cars here and sell cars here, they need to meet these standards. And you get turnover, and then you incentivize folks with things like diamond lane stickers and no vehicle registration, and you make a compelling business case to go buy that Tesla or that BMW i3 like my friend Rich here drives, or the Chevy Volt, or whatever the technology is that we're trying to put in place. And I think that that's where the trucking industry invested over $1 billion locally here in LA Long Beach to help clean the air. And unfortunately, we invested much more than that in the maintenance of vehicles that didn't work and were out of service for 5, 6, 7 weeks at a time. The infrastructure wasn't there to support it. And so moving forward, we need to make sure that, one, let's work with industry to get the right equipment in there. 2, let's figure out how we can make it an affordable return on investment, because at the end of the day, we all benefit from cleaner air. And so there needs to be a bit of skin in the game for everybody, whether that's tax incentive money or tax money that goes into the incentives like cap and trade. We all have to have a stake in this. And so our goal is to work with everybody else to implement common sense goals to get to cleaner technology in a reasonable amount of time.
All right, so that's the technology side. There is a lot of concern in the community about traffic congestion, and they see trucking activities really contributing to traffic congestion, and talk about need for significant investments in infrastructure. How do we make for those people who aren't living near a port and maybe don't think of themselves as being so directly impacted by diesel, but they really do think of themselves as being impacted by traffic, how do we remedy 75 billion is what the price tag for the whole list, right? No doubt there are priorities there that, you get half the list and it's a whole lot, more important set of objectives. Is that an agenda that's strongly support it, or is your industry indifferent? Do you care about the congestion?
I think that the number one issue, at least for my segment of the industry, is congestion. And that's both inside the port itself and then between the port and wherever the end destination is. So the Harbor Trucking Association has been monitoring what we call turn times, how long it takes when you go to the port, you wait in line, you get in, get your container, and leave. Since 2013, and about a year and a half ago, we started investing in real-time monitoring of that and working with the ports and working with container terminals, because we don't want trucks idling. It's not only do you have air quality concerns, but we have financial business concerns, right? That truck makes money when it's moving, not when it's sitting idle. And so I'm very proud of that study, what we've been able to do with it, working with terminals on how to use use better technology and the infrastructure we have to move cargo more efficiently. And one of the biggest things that Chris and I were big proponents of in the CAP was efficiency programs. We want to be able to see efficiency metrics and programs put in place so we can move more volume with the same amount of trucks we have today, not need to add more trucks and more congestion to be able to move the amount of cargo we have. And so there's a lot of operational inefficiencies on the terminal side that slow down trucks, and those are the types of things we try to work collaboratively with to overcome. And you know, when it comes to the funding of infrastructure, that's paramount to the entire industry. I know the CTA stepped up in a big way and supported SB1 and was a major part of why the trucking community together came to support a gas tax for the entire state to be able to have better infrastructure. And I'll let Chris expand on that more. But we're now working and have worked really hard to make sure freight is a part of that. And we're working with local cities like the city of Carson, who is really a near dock facility because it's so close to the port and there's so much warehousing and logistics. I don't know how much of my time each and every week to help the city of Carson get in with Metro, get in with other organizations, and try to get their freight projects like the Overweight Corridor funded, because they're disproportionately affected by an industry that doesn't take care of them in a formulaic way when you start allocating funds.
So maybe Chris can answer this question. It's like, all right, so let's say there's an infrastructure plan, requires some investment. The industry going to participate in that investment? Or is it, I mean, I don't think that there's a sales tax measure that would get 2/3 vote if people thought what they were doing was just investing to help y'all.
Right, and so, you know, this is an interesting time to be talking about transportation infrastructure investment. Obviously, you know, we just had a massive package go through this year, and it's obviously the gift that keeps on giving. We're, you know, potentially going to see 2 initiatives to repeal in the fall. But, you know, we have skin in the game. I can tell you directly now, half of the diesel excise tax increase, 10 cents per gallon, is specifically dedicated towards the state's freight program. And I can tell you, not the day after that package was passed, we had people saying, well, how do we divert that money away from freight infrastructure? And so we had to work with the transportation committees to, you know, put language in there that actually said, no, this is freight infrastructure money, it has to go to freight infrastructure. And so we put, and this is Transportation Geek Talk, what's called Article 19 protection on the money to make sure that it actually went to its intended purposes. And so 10 cents out of every gallon that a trucker fills up today is going to fund
looking at Southern California here, I mean, some of SB1 money is going to come down here and take care of some share of, I don't know, 5 billion, 10 billion maybe of, do you have an estimate of SB1, what it does?
About 3 billion.
All right, so there's about 3 billion. And we're looking, let's just imagine for the purposes of discussion that we're talking half the $75 million list, you know.
Actually, Denny, I forgot to cover this earlier, but of that $75 billion in planned projects, we've currently identified about 21 billion. So
that's
the rest,
priority project. Or you identified 21 billion of revenue?
No, we've identified that existing commitments already are in place to fund about $21 billion of the plan.
Okay.
But that still leaves over 50 billion where the commitments have not yet been identified.
All right, well, I'm not presuming that we can do it all in one swoop, but maybe. I think that's probably a negotiation, but I don't think that we would win something unless unless the industry was willing to go beyond what you already did in SB1. We're looking at Southern California, that's a huge market, et cetera, et cetera. If we had to go to the voters to raise, you know, let's say $700 million for clean air and $700 million for infrastructure, it would have to be, there'd have to be some revenue element of that package too, I would think.
I mean, one thing that needs to be clear, if there is any type of measure that goes to the ballot, to the extent that tries to curtail any ability of local, state regulators to clean up pollution, there will be vigorous opposition to that. And
Right.
I think that
happened in SB1, right?
Yes, and I think we would really work against something like that because
Well,
the trade-off's
I mean,
too much.
Yeah, it's 2/3 vote gives you some leverage in that, I would think.
Yes.
Denny, I think it's a little bit of a two-way street. So we're still talking about how to expand and make more efficient the I-710 corridor. We've been talking about it for 15 years. Metro spent over $45 million on just studies and consultants, and we haven't put a shovel in the ground. And part of the cost issue in California is we can't compete on project-ready initiatives because we can't get a project ready. So there needs to be a little bit of a concession on both sides to say, okay, you want some money, then I want it used efficiently, and we need to stop delaying everything by using the legal process.
We developed, on the 710 project, we developed an alternative in 2012. We hired $80,000 worth of consultants as a coalition, and we put it to Caltrans and Metro. We were ready. We said, expand this highway, but just address the issues. And I think there are some projects that are getting fought and stalled, but 710 is not one of them. We've been ready to play. We just need Caltrans to come with us and figure out how to do this in a way that gets it done.
But a lot of the concerns environmentally would be in the emission side, am I right?
Yes, very deep
And so if
concerns.
part of the program was we're going to roll out clean technology, then that might address some of their concerns and help reduce conflict.
But again, we're not opposed to clean technology. It just needs to work and it needs to be affordable. And I've seen
That's
so
fair.
much money wasted. If you look at the Siemens catenary system that's on Alameda down by the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, it's a complete waste of money. That's not ever going to be a desirable piece of technology, yet we spent millions and millions of dollars on a catenary system that's only used for a couple-mile stretch
All right, we're going to avoid
on diesel trucks.
We're going to avoid anything that looks like mistakes in this process. All right, so Thomas, you represent the Pacific Maritime Shipping Association. Not exactly the trucks, but it's more like the...
We represent the terminals and the ocean carriers on the West Coast.
All right, now, we had a couple of representatives from the ports that we expected here, but they were diverted. But we have somebody here who's been involved with the port thing. So there might be a little dialogue here between you about, I hope that, are we losing our video cameras? Is that what we lost? Oh, the cameras are on, but the lighting is off?
Yeah.
Something went wrong with the lighting. Can you go plug it in or something? What's going on?
I like it.
All right, so anyway, so this is becoming almost like a public negotiation. But all right, so port, there's a clean port plan just released at the City of LA, right?
Both parts.
Both parts released. Give us the quick and dirty on that, what we need to know.
Sure. The plan is focused on moving its established goals to achieve zero-emission trucks and cargo handling equipment. Trucks by 2035, cargo handling equipment by 2030. The concern we have, you've already heard from Chris and Weston, you know, we need equipment that works, that's cost-effective. The technology doesn't exist. The port's own estimate of the cost for achieving that plan is $14 billion.
$7 to $14 billion.
Okay, 7 to 14. We think it's probably closer to 30. But ultimately, the technology doesn't exist today. And so we don't have a path forward right now to achieve the goals set out for the cap, and we are at risk of making promises to the community that we can't fulfill. But, you know, that being said, we need to keep in mind the gains we have made, because this is the third iteration of the Clean Air Action Plan. And under the first two iterations, we've been tremendously successful. Emissions are down, diesel particulate matter is down 87% in the port complex. That's amazing. I don't think any other industry in the state has reduced emissions as quickly and as cost effectively as this industry has. And so, and when we drill down what, you know, again, the cap is focused on cargo handling equipment and trucks. If we look at the numbers for those two sources, we've actually reduced diesel particulate matter an amazing 96%. So we're talking about the last 4% of emissions that we're trying to go after. And, you know, the big question for industry is, you know, as you've heard everyone say, we know where we're going in California. We know it's zero emissions, the eventual endpoint. It's a question of how much is it going to cost, and how fast are we going to take to get there? Because the cost to get that last 4%, the emissions benefits to our community are going to be trivial compared to the regional inventories. But the impact to competitiveness could be significant. One of the things I think a lot of people don't realize is that from 2006, which was the peak year for San Pedro Bay, to 2016, the ports haven't grown. We're actually down 1% as a gateway. Now, there's some good news there. 2017 will be the first year that we have a record year as a gateway for, that we have a record year since the recession. But the problem is our competing ports, the Gulf Coast, the East Coast, Prince Rupert, have been having record years every year for the past decade. And so not only have we not grown for the past decade, we've lost market share as well. And that's really concerning because, as you heard from Alison earlier, you know, 1 in 3 jobs in the state is tied to goods movement. In Southern California, 1 in 9 jobs is specifically tied to the ports. And so if these ports aren't the engine of growth, then we are all worse off for it. So, you know, what we need to make sure we do is that we are growing and we are being green at the same time. And so that means using technologies that we know can reduce emissions 90% today. So, you know, we're really talking about the difference between, we can have a 3.6% reduction of the remaining 4% and get that with technology that exists today, or go for that 4% and who knows when we'll get it. And we can do that 3.6% additional at a fraction of the cost. So that's the cap.
Allow me to be, I'm going to not be rude. I'm just going to say what I think somebody would expect me to say, which is, isn't that what we heard from the automakers? When the ZEV mandate was, you know, 1998, 2% or whatever?
Sure. And look how long it's taken automakers to get here. And even today, the entire EV market is based on government subsidies. So it's not a question of will we get there? It's a question of when will we get there? We simply don't know what the answer is.
Right.
We've spent the past decade, you know, the ports and the terminal operators have been engaged in doing demonstrations of electrified equipment for the past decade.
Okay.
Every one of those demonstrations has moved the technology forward, but every one of those demonstrations has also been unsuccessful. We do not have, after 10 years, a single piece of equipment capable of doing the work.
Danny, I've got a question for, because I read the cap, and you know this, and I know a lot of times we're talking about trucks and certain types of equipment, but this notion that the equipment doesn't exist. When I read the cap, I was actually pleasantly surprised that I saw 10% of the cargo handling equipment was zero emissions equipment right now. And unless
That's
I'm reading
automated terminals.
Yeah,
That's
on the
totally
terminal.
automated terminals.
All right, so
Actually, most
so
of it's the
forklifts.
shoreside cranes.
All right, so Rich Dines, who represents ILWU, which the folks at the harbor workforce, longshoremen, et cetera, correct? But
That's
who
correct.
also worked on the Clean Air Plan.
And I just finished serving 6 years as a harbor commissioner at the Port of Long Beach. So I'm sorry Dave Arian, I'm sorry Rick Cameron are not here. Thank you for the opportunity. It has been 6 years since I actually spoke for the union. So happy to be here. Thank you everyone for staying late. So let's be clear. Yes, there are 13 terminals at the ports of LA and Long Beach. 2 have moved towards automation. That is electrified cargo handling equipment that can have 0 emissions. However, you have somewhere between 60 to 75% loss in jobs. And not just any jobs that are 1/3 of the jobs in the state, the best blue-collar jobs that we know of. Those are the tax base that communities want. I still have not found an elected official that doesn't want me living in their neighborhood or the members that I share this great union with. But that being said, let's be clear. There is a way to do this without moving towards killing off all the good jobs. So we can say, let's spend 30 or 40 or $43 billion and get rid of all of the jobs, and we'll have the cleanest air, but you won't have a local economy. So how do we protect the jobs, grow new jobs, and still get there? Well, this is what we missed in the first 2 Clean Air Action Plans, and we missed efficiencies. So Chris and Weston talked a little bit about the efficiencies, and we are moving on increasing or reducing the turn times for trucks by demanding a universal appointment system where a container might not sit on a terminal 5 days, but it might sit for 5 hours, hopefully. But there's another major efficiency, and I hope people, when they read the Clean Air Action Plan, they don't skip over this, because this is what's critical. It's the efficiencies to get to near zero and 0 emissions. And the second one is to move 50% of the containers coming in and out of our port by on-dock rail. I think that's very important when you're having a discussion, whether it's a alternative 5, alternative 7, or a community alternative 7 on the 710. Are we going to spend $10 or $12 billion when we might move twice as many containers by rail and hopefully 0 emission rail coming in and out of our ports? These efficiencies will increase productivity, drive down what I would call cost per lift, how much it costs to move a container, increase profitability, and if we're looking at how we're going to pay for a Clean Air Action Plan, which I, ladies and gentlemen, think it is less than $7 billion. I think that's a high number. And I think I know as much about the cap as anyone sitting behind this table here. That's how we're going to have to pay for this. It's going to be collaboration from industry without killing jobs and without putting too much pressure on industry, because, as Thomas said, competition is fierce. I understand competition. I live it every day. Nobody wants jobs to go away. Nobody wants cargo or a loss in market share to continue. So we have to find that grand bargain. We have to say, yes, you want 0 emissions, and yes, it costs too much, but how are we meeting in the middle to achieve everyone's goal of having a thriving economy and having clean air and reducing costs? And the last point is this. What we do here will be followed by every major port, not only in the country, but globally. It's very important, as you said, Dave, we've got to get it right.
So if we figure out a $30 billion infrastructure program and to match the $20 billion that's coming, and we've got $1 billion a year clean air program, maybe a grand bargain is possible.
I'm absolutely convinced that we can achieve our goals. It's not going to happen tomorrow. The cost of a proposed clean truck program is said to be $8 billion. How do we come up with $8 billion? Do we need 16,000 zero-emission trucks? Well, if you drive efficiencies through the supply chain and specifically through the port terminals, maybe you don't need 16,000 electric dray trucks. So, and we don't even know what the cost of the new Tesla electric truck. Maybe it's $200,000. Maybe with incentives alone, we find a way to pay for the clean truck program. For the cargo handling equipment, It's challenged, but the one thing we know about the 13 terminals is it's not one port. It's not one terminal. They all have a different business model. Maybe some, the two that have opted for automation, want to go down that path. Maybe the others are more focused on efficiencies to drive down costs, increase profitability, find zero-emission cargo handling equipment, which I've got my ILWU hat on. The ILWU has been very successful in looking at making sure the correct language is in place, that new equipment coming online actually has a place for a driver to sit in a seat to operate that equipment. Nobody's against zero emissions. It's how do we pay for it? How do we all work together to achieve that goal?
All right, so Kat, if I understand, Kat Janowicz, you're an industry consultant. So here we are, we're listening to this. Most of us don't look at the industry on a daily basis. And when we hear, environmental justice arguments and then the operating and the cost issues and technology limitations, we don't know. What do you know? What can you tell us?
So we hear there's some confusion with the
I think we got to get you right into the microphone.
Okay. All right, can you hear me now?
Is your firm Thricotech or Ecotech?
It's written Thricotech, however, I call it Ecotech from the three different pillars.
Okay.
Environment, economy, and efficiency. We hear a lot of confusion today about technology. On one side, we hear technology exists, on the other side, technology doesn't exist. We made a great progress into these new technologies. But the question is, we spoke about trucking and how commercially available are these technologies. So for some, there will be, we already drive electric vehicles, small vehicles, but when we are talking about the goods movement and the big containers that and the tons of goods that have to be moved, that technology is not really ready today. So that's, I think we have to understand where the where the line is or what's commercially available today. So when we are talking about the CAP program, we also have to say that looking at the goods movement, and I think CAP really great, and it shows the six different strategies. And the strategies include cargo handling equipment, they include a harbor craft, ocean-going vessel, rail, energy, and trucks. We talk about trucks a lot, but we don't really talk much about other initiatives like rail or ocean-going vessel, and it's mainly because the ports or our local community has very little leverage or none. So what the ports can do, they can regulate the cargo handling equipment, or they can we can make changes in our local trucking industry. But we already know that the change is coming from IMO. This is coming, the low sulfur fuels across the globe. There are different strategies. When we are talking about energy, we forget to think about how much demand we would need in the next few years. The ports alone estimate that they will have, the energy demand will quadruple over the next years. With the major infrastructure projects, and a lot of them require energy, then it will be massive demand. So we in terms of goods movement, and we really need to see this bigger picture and really understand the different issues, and also life cycle analysis. For example, if we are talking about the zero emission, we are talking about the tailpipe emissions. What about where we got this product, we got this great electric car, there's no tailpipe emission, but how this car was made, where the products came for this car, what happens after we stop using it? So we don't really see that whole cycle. of things. And I think this is another important thing to really consider.
Okay, so Wendy. Wendy Wendlandt from both Environment California and from Public Interest Group, I guess is the
network.
Public Interest Group.
CalPIRG. Many people would know CalPIRG is our California affiliate.
Yes, everybody ever heard of CalPIRG? Well, heard of CalPIRG. And Environment California, which is, I always thought of as the environmental spin-off.
Exactly.
Is that a fair?
It's the new home of our environmental program.
All right, so now, when one looks at your website and information, it's clear that your organization is interested in all kinds of environmental issues.
Correct.
Including emissions and toxins and what have you. But you're also operated nationally in an environment where there was lots of, no doubt, wheeling and dealing and trying to find, grand bargains and what have you. I guess I'm most interested in getting your political perspective here is, do you see the elements of a discussion? Do you think that we're barking up the wrong tree, or do you think that this has got promise? This idea that there's a funding measure with a program that might address the issues of the environmental justice community and the environmental community at large, the air district plan, but also seek to provide the kinds of infrastructure improvements and certainties and so on that industry might need. Does this look like it has any legs to you?
Yes, of course, Denny.
I did not rehearse his
No,
words.
Sure. I think, anything where there's a will, there's a way. I don't think, sure, there's technological limitations to making change, but it's really about the political will. And so for me, this always comes down to, can you put together the political coalition that actually believes that this is possible and come to an agreement? For us, as you say, we don't just care about clean air. We care about clean air, we care about clean water, we care about open space, we care about climate change, and I think there's for us, an overarching imperative is not just, can the port keep operating and can there be more jobs, but can we stop climate change in time so that we can continue to live here in Southern California and not just go up and smoke, as some of our friends up in Northern California have experienced recently. So we feel great urgency to solving the climate change problem for sure, and would do many things and push as hard as we possibly could to get those changes. So I think for us, the sticking points, just having been here listening to the conversation and reading the papers that Denny has circulated on this topic, I think the sticking points for us, and maybe there are more, I'm sure there are more, but the immediate ones relate to use of fossil fuels. I am definitely with Tom Steyer on not wanting to invest a single more dollar of public resources in infrastructure or promotion of fossil fuels. That includes natural gas. So if Todd Campbell's still here. Oh, right there, right in front of me even.
He's the biomethane guy, I think.
Well, I was going to say, and the renewable natural gas, not so fond of that concept either. So, and that's, I'm kind of making light of it, but that's a real sticking point for us. And I can imagine that if we got into some conversation of what's actually in the measure and what's the money going towards, we might have differences of opinion for sure. But that doesn't mean that there's not a possibility of a grand bargain, because obviously I've been at this myself for more than 30 years, and our organizations have been at it for 40 years, and we haven't gotten here and gotten the results that we have by just, wanting things that are not possible. What PIRG and Environment California are very focused on incremental change, change that can actually make a difference, like the recent Metro decision on 100% electric buses. We love that kind of stuff. So I'm all for working to do that, but I don't want to be naive or Pollyanna-ish that we don't have some differences of opinion here on this panel and the panel before us.
Okay, or maybe with me.
Or maybe even with Denny.
So that's good. This is, I think this has been a fruitful discussion then. I don't know whether I'm going to ask everybody to opine whether they think a grand bargain is possible. I think I'll wait. We'll do that privately and discuss it. But my guess is that the right word in any case is maybe, just maybe. And it would depend upon particulars, as we have heard. So I want to have one last person give an opinion here. Eric Tate, who is the head of Local 848. And he's here in spirit, but also on film. And so we got a brief film from him. Eric, Local 848 was involved, well, they're Teamsters. So they are truck owner-operators who got a caveat here they want to make sure everybody hears. Is that a drum? What is it? This is Eric Tate from Teamsters Local 848. Local 848 was involved in the Clean Port program at the Port of Los Angeles and Port of Long Beach, and have some experience with strategies, programs to deploy clean trucks in the, at the port. And there were some problems that occurred with that. It had to do with a court decision. I'm going to ask Eric to briefly explain what happened and what it meant for the drivers.
We had a clean air port campaign that brought clean trucks to the ports, which I think everybody was in favor of. And we're still in favor of having clean trucks or zero emission trucks at the port, because air quality is important to everyone, especially in Los Angeles where there's a lot of smog. But the issues that occurred last time was that the drivers ended up buying those trucks or paying for those trucks through leases from the companies that actually operate in the ports.
And how that happened? That had something to do with the court decision, right?
Yeah, originally the Clean Air program was supposed to make everyone have to be an employee to the companies, which means the companies would have had to purchase those trucks, and which should have been the way it should have worked, because subsidies were given to these companies to buy those trucks. But in turn, what happened is these companies got the subsidies, put the trucks out there, but then turned around and got reimbursed for those trucks from the workers, from the people that actually drive the trucks, which they didn't get any subsidies, so they ended up paying full price for the truck, so the company actually got paid twice for the same truck.
And that was, the court, I guess, ruled, the program had the truck drivers become employees, but then the court decision said that the port could not impose that condition, and so drivers went back to being contractors instead of employees, and they had to then lease the trucks rather than the company simply owning the trucks. And that's kind of where things got messed up, right?
Correct. So that escalated us to where we're at today.
What's important here is the lesson learned, and we're looking at a possible measure that might include money to help subsidize clean trucks. And we want to make sure that we understand what happened here so that a similar situation doesn't occur in the future. Is that, is that a goal that you think is important, and what advice do you have for us?
I think it's more than a goal. I think it's a necessity. I mean, you can't do the same thing that you did before. I mean, they had checks and balances in the measure from last time that these companies weren't supposed to be able to lease these trucks and do what they did. The problem is there was no enforcement. No one was there to enforce the laws. There's no one there today to enforce these laws. It continues on. The statute of limitations that ran out as far as them being able to go after these truck company owners for what they did in the past, but they need to make sure that if they try and do it again this go around, that there's someone there to penalize them and make sure that these things don't happen twice.
All right, so we have to make sure that whatever the measure says, there's no opportunity to leave the drivers holding the bag. He said yes. So maybe I'll give everybody a chance to make like a few closing statements about this discussion, starting with Alison.
Sure. Well, I think definitely it's a very complicated issue. We've heard from different perspectives today. And as you said initially, SCAG is somewhat positioned to convene all these different interests and make these voices heard. There's a lot of opportunities to get involved in our planning process, either formally through our board meetings or public meetings. We also have different working groups, and we're always available for one-on-one meetings or to give a presentation at your organization. So if you do want more communication on these topics, I think SCAG provides that venue. And I would also say that like I said, the issue is very complicated. I liked Weston's earlier point about looking for other opportunities to reduce emissions or gain greater efficiencies. It's not just the technology, but it's a whole extensive, complicated system. And a lot of that is being driven by business decisions already. For example, companies are working together to do load matching. So, empty trucks are less prevalent on the roads, or half-full trucks are now at greater capacity. So there's a lot of opportunities for the industry to increase efficiency at the moment as well.
So Adrian, let's go over here and start at this end.
Yeah, on the efficiency issue, I think you have to do both. Dr. Parker mentioned the $1 billion per year. I think it's important to note that's for the Bush era old ozone standard. That doesn't even calculate what we need to meet the 2015 ozone standard. So I think there's a lot that has to be done. I think it's going to be efficiency. I think it's going to be pushing towards zero emissions and other cleaner technologies. The other thing on the automation, on autonomous vehicles and all this, at least the environmental groups in the region, we haven't been pushing that. That's mainly, I think, other businesses and industry. So I think there are technologies in zero emissions. I'll have to disagree. There's certain applications, forklifts, these are very commercially available. It's not commercially available for everything right now, but that's the point. California is about putting bold, aspirational goals and interim milestones to push us to meet those goals. We need that here to get to zero emissions. And then finally, I think the Clean Air Action Plan, the lucky thing about it, it's a pretty high-level document. I think we're going to have about 3 years of discussion as it gets implemented. And the last point I'll make on energy use, I was talking to Chris before the panel, a lot of the cost of his members is fuel. I don't know, electricity is a pretty affordable fuel, and then when you add in low carbon fuel standards, potentially integrating renewables, energy storage, I think it's something we need to look at seriously as a way not only to drive emissions down, but also to help drive down costs for the industry.
Chris.
So I think, with due respect to our friends from labor, I would say our national organization was the one that won the Supreme Court decision that essentially says you can't dictate the business model of a particular company. That was a unanimous decision at the Supreme Court. And I think it's reductive to just say that making everybody an employee will suddenly defray all the costs of these plans. Our association has companies that run both employees, independent contractors, union, non-union, and I can tell you that the last round, I think this is something that Thomas touched on, of regulations statewide to clean up about 1 million trucks. The state estimated that the cost was roughly $2 to $3 billion. So just think about the fact that we're talking about 1 million trucks, $2 to $3 billion, and now just the ports doing around 12,000 trucks, spending, be it 8 or 4 billion, the scale of what we're talking about. And so I think really what we're trying to do in these discussions about grand bargains is how do we do this in a way that preserves the economy broadly, be it union, non-union shops. We're really talking about the success of California as a freight gateway, and I think that involves everybody. And so, hopefully we can concentrate on the things that we can agree on.
Okay, let's have Thomas, and then we'll come to Wendy.
I think one of the things that we do have to focus on and that you've heard here is efficiency. I think given the technological changes that are coming, some of them slowly, and the need to be competitive, we're going to see a transformation of what these ports look like over the next 5 to 10 years. I think it will be radically different. This industry is facing tremendous consolidation, sort of like the airline industry a decade ago. We will have fewer terminals, we will have larger terminals, we'll have fewer ocean carriers, and the mode of operation will change. That will be good for some folks, it'll be bad for others, but it'll probably, I imagine, be necessary if Southern California is going to be the premier gateway of international trade into this country. And so whether it's new types of equipment, free flow models, improved technology, blockchain for monitoring freight, they're all sort of things that need to be investigated now because we tend to focus on a single technological fix like zero emissions, and we're not focused on where is the industry moving overall, and that's going to be the transformative nature, and that's going to dictate the technology that eventually gets deployed at the terminals and throughout the logistics supply chain.
Wendy.
I'll just say 2 things. One is I like what Chris said about finding common ground. I think that's a good next step, which is to figure out what can we actually agree on. So I like that. And the second thing, I don't think it's come up in this conversation, but I wanted to say, I mean, it is the case that we can help to drive the market if we do these things here in Southern California. So I think that's an exciting opportunity. I expect that there's business, interest in that kind of innovation. And so we should also think about the impact that we can have, particularly in today's political climate, where, as I think we know, we're not going to be getting a lot out of Washington. So I think it's great for Southern California being as big an economy as we are, and if we could get our friends in Northern California to be doing similar things, I think that would be terrific to move the nation and probably the world towards these technologies.
Weston.
Yeah, and thanks for having me today, Denny. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I want to echo a lot of what Chris has had to say. We look at the first Clean Trucks program, and industry said we need at least 3 turns a day, a driver making a move in and out of a terminal and picking up and dropping off cargo 3 times a day to pay for the equipment. Now, that doesn't matter if it's an employee driver or an independent contractor. That's what the cost of the equipment was going to take. And the fact of the matter is, last year, most companies were averaging about 1 to 1.5 turns per day. As the steamship line, or as the ships have gotten bigger and they've consolidated, we've gotten a lot less efficient as far as dual transactions. At one point in time, it was under 20%. So that's where you go in and out with a container. So we had a lot of empty legs, which is, again, inefficient. And that's why we are such big champions of efficiency measures, because not only do efficiencies help cut down air emissions, but they help create the business case to invest in clean technology. And so as we move forward, we need to take into consideration that it's not all about what type of technology is available. It's about what can we do with the technology we have today, and how can we take those efficiencies to invest in the technology of the future. And so we want to work with everybody. We just don't want it dictated to us or mandated to us on what we have to use or what we have to do.
Kat.
So thank you for I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you. And we have to recap, so we have two major problems here, 2 major challenges. The congestion and emission we are talking about. And so with this many infrastructure improvement projects, we need to look at if we are doing the right project at the time. Can we move the cargo off-road? The currently CAP has the 50% on dock rail. There is one of the opportunities. Why not more? If so, then there may be a question of we may ask different questions about the currently having the projects, the infrastructure projects being held. So we need to work together and explore different options and opportunities and really find the right balance for our region.
Rich.
Well, thank you, Denny, for inviting the ILWU here. You know, when I look at the impacts of a changing port, it's really my job that I think is really on the line. And I've been blessed to spend 20 years in this industry. I hope I get another 15. The one thing that is encouraging, and it was my biggest goal in helping write the CAP, was to focus on efficiency. And I think that you have a lot of agreement here about efficiency moving forward. I think that's what's going to get us to the promised land. That is what's going to help us find this grand bargain. I know a lot of us are very far apart on what we believe we should do or how much it's going to cost and how we get there. But if we're not having the discussions and we're not working on solutions, but I am very much the optimist. I do believe that we will get to be the first zero-emission port complex in 2035, or maybe it's 2040. We have a lot of challenges. We need funding sources. But without profitable industry, without everyone doing well, without truckers doing 3 or 4 or 5 turns, we're not getting those new trucks. So if we're going to sacrifice jobs, whether it's truckers' jobs or people's at warehouses or longshoremen, then that's a non-starter for me. But if we can everyone focus on having a thriving economy with clean air, then I think we could all come together and solve all the problems we have. Thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I will say that I like efficiency. I like cleaner technologies. Sounds to me like those are both desirable objectives, but not simply on the parts. What we're really looking at as well is a higher level of efficiency and clean technologies off the parts as well. So there's a highway set of issues here that have to be addressed. You know, truck-only lanes is one of the proposals that are on the table somewhere. You know, they may be good ideas. There are communities who may object because of potential disruptions. I think those objections are serious objections and they need to be treated seriously. And so if we're going to think that way, we need to figure out how to avoid those kinds of displacements. So this to me sounds like where I thought I was January 10th, 2008, when we gathered here in this room with a smaller group than had been here and started hashing out what became Measure R. And Measure R begat Measure M. And together they will begat $160 billion, which makes 8 or 14 seem modest, makes our challenge seem achievable, makes it seem possible to me that that young man who on election day morning woke up in a fit in my house thinking that there would never be a solution to climate change and that his generation might live to be 50 because of cascading effects that were, he believed, already underway because of climate change and because of a redirection expected in federal policy. I want to be able to say that here in California, we're going to drive the needle and we're going to find a bargain that helps us do that. That should be our mission. Thank you.